In this series, we'll go over all the cards banned on the Commander ban list and explain why they're banned. Today, we're going to go over a bunch of legendary cards that could, at least theoretically, be your commander. This makes them especially interesting to talk about, as it makes the old banned as commander list an especially important point to bring up. With all that said, let's get started. First up, we have Griselbrand. This is a 7/7 legendary demon creature with a mana cost of 4 and 4 black. It has flying and lifelink, meaning it can only be blocked by other creatures with flying, and if dealing damage, also causes you to gain that much life. It also has the ability where you can pay 7 life to draw 7 cards. This card was banned in June of 2012. Why was Griselbrand banned? Griselbrand is one of the most powerful creatures ever printed, and one that would only be even stronger in Commander. Paying 7 life to draw 7 cards is just so much card advantage that you can easily run away with the game. Even worse, this is usually enough for you to draw into some kind of combo to close out the game right there. This is true in most 60 card formats. But in Commander, this is even easier to do, as you can draw twice as many cards with your inflated life total. Going to less than 10 life will make you pretty easy to kill, but if you can safely win the game before then it won't be much of an issue. This issue is only worsened by the fact that Griselbrand is a legendary creature, meaning it can both be your commander and it's very easy to cheat out without even paying the 8 mana for it. Just in black, you can use powerful reanimator effects to get Griselbrand out without paying the 8 mana. You also have cards like Entomb and Buried Alive to send cards directly from your library to the graveyard, letting you get Griselbrand out as soon as the first turn of the game with the help of some fast mana. You can do this with a lot of creatures, but Griselbrand's draw power makes it by far the best target for this kind of strategy. This isn't even to mention the other means of cheating creatures out, such as with Elvish Piper style effects and the like. Griselbrand is really one of the few creatures that's really just too powerful for the format. Whether it be in the Commander Zone or in the 99, the card really does need to stay banned. What are the arguments for unbanning Griselbrand? The main argument would be that cards of similar power are legal in the format and not banned anywhere. Some cards that do very similar things would be Razaketh the Foul-Blooded, which lets you pay 2 life and sacrifice a creature to search your library for any card and put it into your hand. This is about as powerful as Griselbrand's ability, and it's perfectly legal. So why is Griselbrand the only card banned? Well, Razaketh takes just a bit more setup to be able to use. The difference between paying life and paying life on top of sacrifice the creature is enough that Razaketh is slightly harder to make use of. Now, they are close enough in power that you could make an argument in favor of letting Griselbrand come back, but he would steal enough games that it probably wouldn't be a good idea. There are also cards like Necropotence available in the format, which does almost the exact same thing as Griselbrand, though there are a few important differences. The biggest one is that Necropotence gives you the cards at the end of the turn instead of right away, which means you have to wait a turn to combo off. There's also the issue of Griselbrand being available in the command zone, which isn't the biggest deal, but does make it a bit easier to access than Necropotence is. To be perfectly honest, if Griselbrand is banned, Necro should maybe just get hit too, since they're a bit too close in power level to each other, but there are edges that Griselbrand has over Necro. All in all, Griselbrand is just a little bit too much and the best card for paying life to draw cards in the format. But you could argue that other cards also need to be hit or that it could come off. Next up, we have Emrakul the Aeons Torn. This is a 15/15 legendary Eldrazi creature with a mana cost of 15. It has the abilities where it can't be countered, it has flying, protection from colored spells, meaning it can't be targeted or dealt damage by colored spells, Annihilator 6, meaning that whenever it attacks, the defending player sacrifices 6 permanents. And when you cast Emrakul, you take an extra turn after this one. And whenever Emrakul is put into the graveyard from anywhere, you shuffle your graveyard into your library. This card was banned in December of 2010. Now, why was Emrakul banned? Emrakul was just too strong overall, having far too much of an impact in any game where it's cast. Taking an extra turn when you cast it, in addition to having multiple forms of protections, means that you'll usually get to attack with Emrakul if you cast it. This means you'll get to attack for 15 damage and get rid of 16 permanents from one of your opponent's boards, which is often enough for the player's game to basically be over. Similar to Griselbrand, you don't actually need to cast Emrakul to get it out, meaning you can get this massive threat to play far earlier than turn 15. You can't reanimate Emrakul quite as easily due to its shuffling effect, but all your other creature cheating effects will still work. The thing about Emrakul is that it instantly made the entire game about answering this threat. You couldn't possibly ignore a resolved Emrakul, as it will far too quickly eat up your board state and answer the game. It wasn't any one thing that the card did that made it too good, but rather that just did everything you could want. Due to how game warping Emrakul was, the card was banned. What are the arguments for unbanning Emrakul? This is a case where the overall rise in the power level of the game is worth mentioning. Far fewer games of Commander are being won off the back of a fair mid-range strategy slowly amassing a giant board and running over everyone. More and more people are running combos or semi-combos to try and win the game without actually going to combat, and the combat decks that do exist are getting faster and faster. Casting a 15 mana spell to end the game is, at this point, really reasonable. Cards like Coma, Cosmo Serpent take over the game for only 7 mana. And while the card isn't as impactful as Emrakul is, for half the mana it's pretty reasonable. The format has caught up to Emrakul in terms of power level, to the point where its place in the ban list feels like a relic of a bygone era more than anything. Next up, we have Braids Cabal Minion. This is a 2/2 legendary human minion with a mana cost of 2 and 2 black. It has the ability where, at the beginning of each player's upkeep, that player sacrifices an artifact, a creature, or a land. This card was banned in June of 2009. Why was Braids banned? This card is really frustrating to play against, mostly due to how it slowly eats away at everyone's resources. Every turn, each player is going to lose a permanent, and while they can continue casting spells to try and develop their boards, a few bad draws will often be enough to make you start needing to sacrifice lands. Once you're sacrificing lands, you'll eventually be buried in an avalanche of sacrifice triggers as you slowly end up without any game actions. This is only made worse if the Braids players playing cards like Pox or Smallpox that force players to sacrifice lands and creatures and discard cards. Now, Braids is symmetrical, as are most of the cards they'd be playing alongside it, so the Braids player will also have to deal with all of this as well. And while there are ways to make this a winning strategy, whether or not it was good wasn't really why it was banned. It was more banned because the strategy was considered uncasual, or in other words, just unfun. There's nothing Commander players get more upset about than someone stopping them from completing their strategy, and denying your opponent's plays is all Braids does. Due to this, the Rules Committee saw Braids as a problematic card, and she was banned from the format. What are the arguments for unbanning Braids? Since the card isn't banned for power level reasons at all, the card's banning is far more contentious than other cards. There are certainly a number of people who like playing these kinds of decks and find these resource-style strategies fun, who would love to see the card come back. And it's hard to really have too much of a discussion about if the card should be banned or not, since to do that, you have to get into a larger discussion about game design. What is fun? What kind of experience should Magic and Commander as a format be geared toward? And how should the ban list play into that? There are very long and interesting conversations the community has had time and time again, but they're a little beyond the scope of the series. The main takeaway is that the Braids banning is very subjective, and not something you can make very substantial arguments for without laying out a lot more about how you think about the game. The second major thing that needs to be talked about with Braids ban is the old banned as Commander rule. This worked about how it sounded. There were certain cards that were allowed in the 99, but were only banned as your commander. The rule was removed because the Rules Committee thought it would be too confusing for new players. To be straight to the point, this isn't very convincing. There are lots of things in Commander that are far more confusing than a second ban list that would only be a few cards long. Things like color identity rules would probably take a lot more work for a new player to learn, so getting rid of this very useful ban list for that reason seems silly. Braids would make far more sense on the banned as Commander list, since in the 99 it can simply be answered once and forgotten about. It being able to come back over and over again is a big part of making the resource denial strategy of the card work. Next up we have Golos Tireless Pilgrim. This is a 3/5 legendary scout artifact creature with a mana cost of 5. It has the abilities where, when it enters a battlefield, you search your library for a land card and put it into the battlefield, then shuffle. It also has the ability where you can pay 2, a white, blue, black, red, and green to exile the top 3 cards of your library. For the rest of the turn, you can play those cards and you can play them without paying their mana cost. This card was banned in September of 2021. Why was Golos banned? This card was just the best commander for a generic deck in the format for several reasons. One, the card had a completely generic mana cost with the ability to tutor lands out of the deck. This makes Golos both a great source of mana fixing and mana ramp. This means that, even if you don't have the best mana base around, Golos could always fix your mana for you, making his second ability extremely easy to activate. The activated ability is extremely powerful, and on most turns, if you have the 7 mana available, which you probably will since Golos just ramped you, using the activated abilities will be the best use of your turn. Golos would make it so that one player just repeatedly casts giant, powerful spells for no mana investment on each of their turns. And if you did remove Golos, it didn't do much. Golos finding you a land drop allowed it to pay for most of its commander tax, as it would only cost 2 more mana each time. It could even pay for the entire tax if you found lands that tap for 2 mana, which are more common than you might think. Worst of all, you didn't even need to be playing a 5-color deck for Golos to be worth playing. If you were on a 2 or 3 color deck, you could just play a few cards like Mana Confluence to tutor out with Golos and only spend the mana to activate his ability. This made him extremely generic to the point where Golos was threatening the commander diversity of the format. Golos was basically a runaway value train that was very difficult to stop, and for that reason, the card was banned. What are the arguments for unbanning Golos? The banning of Golos had as many people bemoaning it as celebrating it. A lot of people just didn't find Golos particularly egregious as a commander, as the card isn't really even that much of a powerhouse. Cards like Urza, Lord High Artificer, are much more powerful commanders that can do a lot more work in a game. And while Golos can get you a lot of value, that's not the most unique thing in the world. The card just wasn't the most powerful thing to be doing in the format, so hitting it over more egregious cards that took over more games more often didn't make much sense. Additionally, there are other 5-color commanders that don't require all 5 colors of mana to cast, such as Kenrith the Returned King. Now, Golos is a little worse than Kenrith is, thanks to his ability to free cast spells and find lands from your deck, but they are close in how good they are at taking over games. This is a bit of a strange situation, since the ban is very much targeted towards lower to middle power tables, where Golos would often run away with games. Unfortunately, with this even more so than a lot of other bans, we have to defer to arbitrarity. In my own experience, Golos has been a thorn in the side of the format that forces players to raise the power level of their decks to just win faster than it can, or to hate the Golos player out of the game to have a chance. But personal experience isn't the strongest argument. This really gets to an issue a lot of players have with Commander ban lists in general, which is that Commander is such a large, diverse format that banning a card has massive ripple effects over tons of playgroups where the card may or may not have been a problem. Golos is generally accepted to be an overtuned card and a design mistake, but if it deserves a ban or not is far too subjective to make any objective statements on. Finally, we have Rofellos, Llanowar Emissary. This is a 2/1 legendary elf druid with a mana cost of 2 green. It is the ability where you can tap it to add 1 green mana for each forest you control. This card was banned in March of 2007. Why was Rofellos banned? This card was really good at ramping you in Commander, since you could just consistently cast it on turn 2 of every game. Rofellos would basically double your mana all on his own, as in a Rofellos deck, you would always play only forests for your lands. With twice as much mana, you'll be able to run away with the game in no time. Made even better by all of green lands ramping, letting you put even more forests into play. Mana doubling is an effect that you usually only get for 5 mana at the cheapest. Getting it on turn 3 is far too powerful, or at least it would be if it weren't for how easy it is to kill Rofellos. This is usually enough to keep the elf in check, but in Commander, he becomes far more potent. Being able to recast Rofellos anytime he's removed makes him a lot harder to deal with. This is true of most commanders, but with one that comes down so early and can run away with the game to this degree, it becomes a much bigger issue. This would make mono green decks just a little too good, so the card was banned to keep them in check. For this reason, Rofellos was banned. What are the arguments for unbanning Rofellos? This is another commander that was originally banned as Commander, and one that most players would like to return to that status. In the 99, the card is a lot more manageable, though a tad on the stronger side. Still, in a format with Sol Ring legal, a one-off powerful ramp spell isn't really even worth writing home about. The other main argument for unbanning Rofellos, outside of just bringing back the old ban as a Commander rule, is that the card was banned a long time ago, and the format has gotten a lot faster. Rofellos doesn't by himself let you win the game. He only lets you cast powerful spells early, which, while good, is something that a lot of decks are probably ready to deal with. Now, while this is true, Rofellos is probably a bit too much. It really does require an early removal spell, as unless the Rofello player has a really weak hand, they'll probably rocket really far ahead of the rest of the table, possibly winning the game before anyone else can find an answer. While it's not as good as it used to be, having Rofellos in the command zone would probably still be too much, especially at lower power level tables. Alright, and that's the video. If you have any more ideas for videos similar to this one, please let us know down in the comments below.